All right, guys. Spring bear season, right around the corner, right? Or it may have even started in your neck of the woods. Here's the deal on spring bears. I've been guiding these hunts for 10, 15 years, 4 to 6 weeks every spring. And it doesn't matter if you're in Canada. It doesn't matter if you're in a western state on a road-based hunt or a backpack hunt. You have got to understand 3 or 4 concepts, or you're basically walking around the woods with your thumb up your ass when you're spring bear hunting. It's not a hard hunt. It's easy to get the tags generally. As a guided hunt, they're pretty economical. If you're a DIY guy, again, you can road hunt them. You can hike back in there on day hunts. You can backpack hunt them. Tons of options. But you've got to understand these concepts or you're going to be wasting your time. Once you understand these, you're going to have way more days where you see multiple bears in a single day, a single afternoon, and your chances of killing a bear are going to exponentially rise. So let's get into it. The first thing you got to focus on when it comes to bears is the fact that they are the cookie monster of the wild world. They are always optimizing how much feed there is, where they're feeding, how much weight they can put on. This is in the fall or the spring, and you've got to focus on that as a hunter because that's where they're going to be susceptible. That's where you're going to find the little things in their pattern, the little niches in what they do that are going to allow you to kill one. The reason this is a challenge for a lot of bear hunters is a lot of bear hunters are also just broader big game hunters, right? So they're used to hunting elk, they're used to hunting deer. In those species, a lot of the variables that make those animals susceptible to harvest, they're based on photo period. So the number of hours in a day. So we look at the migration of mule deer, we look at the whitetail rut, we look at the elk rut. All of those are based on how many hours there are during the day. So they're pretty consistent year to year. The thing that happens when we move into spring bear hunting, there is really very little of that when it comes to the bear's susceptibility. The bear's susceptibility is around its food source. And what that food source is doing has nothing to do with photo period. It is 100% based on environmental variables. So the green up in the spring, and I'll get into the nitty gritty of it here, you know, what triggers it, but that's what the bears are focused on. When they wake up, they're gonna go to the green grass that they can find, right? And they're gonna go to the best green grass that they can find. And then they might move over and they might start hitting dandelions. And then they might move over in certain areas and they start hitting a different plant. But overall, they're focused on a certain grass species or flower or whatever that is based purely on environmental variables. So the issue is that I can be in a certain location on May 10th in 2022, seeing 10 bears in an afternoon. Everybody I'm guiding's killing bears. It's bear skinning bonanza. And then I can come back the next year to the exact same place on the exact same date. It can be crap hunting, right? So the first thing you have to understand on this is you got to go into spring bear hunts with different levels of flexibility. It's an advantage to be flexible to hunt different latitudes, right? Because latitudes matter regardless of the snowpack, how warm it is, all of that, which are the key variables to this. Regardless of that, that's going to slowly migrate with latitude, right? The higher you are up in latitude, the later that melt off is going to be. So if you miss it down at a lower latitude, you can chase it up latitude. Now, you can do the same thing with elevation. Generally, that nice green grass that the bears like to hit is going to be behind the snow melt, right? So you can go up elevation. Those are ways you can be flexible as a hunter. You got to be open to those two things. And you can combine that with logistics, right? If you're not road-based, and I'll get into this more too, I'll go into like some tactics on different types of hunts, but let's say you're not road-based, you're backpack-based. In your mind, you're thinking to yourself, well, it's hard to be flexible, right? Well, you need to plan accordingly. If you're gonna go backpack an area, It's got to be somewhere where you can get to a lot of different elevation grades, and you got to be willing to go way up there, get to those glassing points where during the prime hours you can glass a whole bunch of different elevations so you can figure out where that feed is based on the environmental variables. Other aspect of this, it's a trait of a lot of guys that kill a lot of spring bears, but not everybody can do it. I'm planning to hunt this week, but the environmental variables are telling me that I should actually hunt 2 weeks later or 1 week earlier, so I'm gonna do that. That type of flexibility pays off huge with bears because of this concept. So I've kind of talked about it abstractly, but you've got to understand that bears, they wake up in the spring purely due to temperatures. So you've got to have somewhere in the range, I've talked to a lot of different biologists, I've read the vast majority of the academic literature, but with black bears, you've got to have at their den site, you've got to have 3 to 7 days of 40 to 45 degree weather or warmer, and they're gonna come out of the den. They tend to dawdle around the den, kind of re-den sometimes. They're just kind of hanging out for another 3 to 4 days. So now you're looking at a window of say 7 to 10 days of those warmer temperatures. Now those warmer temperatures, we're looking at, 10, 15, 20 degrees above freezing. If you have that for 10 days, it correlates perfectly with green up somewhere as long as there's sun exposure. There's a reason for all of this, right? The bears are getting up at that time because there's going to be feed availability. They're hanging out a little bit because they don't want to misjudge it, go out into la la land, and it turns out it's just a little warm snap, and now they have no feed, and they've got to burn calories to get back to their den, right? So all this is evolved behavior. But once you understand this, you know what's going on, right? And those first areas of green up that all the bears are going to go to are going to be the exposed areas. So on the natural side of things, you're talking about snow slides, right? Depending on, the angle and the aspect of that snow slide, one side of it could have snow in it and the other side of it is probably going to be green, and that's where you're going to see bears, right? They're going to hit that. If it's a coastal mountain British Columbia snow slide that goes from 800 feet to 5,000 feet, you're only going to find bears where that snow is coming off the angle of that slide that's getting the sunshine and has had the sunshine for 7 to 10 days. Other places that you'll see this exact same thing, man-made stuff like logging roads where the canopy has been taken off the shoulder, that green grass on the road is going to grow the same way. Big meadows, same deal. They're going to have some exposure to the light because they don't have a canopy. 10 days of warm weather, you're going to have grass, and that's where the bears are going to hit. So all this plays in, but you got to keep that in mind, that hitting that just right is a big factor. And the reason that hitting it just right is a big factor is anybody who's hunted spring bears a lot will tell you that the easiest time to kill them is right then, right? And that first week that a bunch of bears have gotten up, or the first 15 days that a lot of bears have gotten up, because what you have is you have limit of habitat and limit of places they can go, because you have just those slivers of green grass, right? Just that one side of the road that's got green grass, right? So you can be glassing that limited amount of habitat that's based on those environmental variables. The point here is that is going to vary year to year, so you got to know what you're looking at. You can't just stumble around when you're spring bear hunting and hopefully you run into bears. You've got to be looking for that green grass that is kind of close to stuff that's not green. And the reason I say that is that if you get into a time frame or a place or a latitude or an elevation, all of a sudden you've got green grass everywhere, but you've also got a bunch of other food sources. You've got skunk cabbage, you've got dandelions, you got your clovers, you got balsam root. All of that is starting to enter the picture, and what happens is the bears get dispersed, very dispersed, and all of a sudden the hunting becomes way more difficult and your timing's wrong, right? So that is where you don't want to be. You want to be on that edge of the green up, right? You want to be hunting that stuff that's been green for 5 days, it's been green for 10 days. That's the stuff where the guys that consistently kill bears, that's what they focus on. And a lot of times, down low, yes, there can be green up everywhere, skunk cabbage everywhere if you're in the Pacific Northwest. There can be there can be balsam root all over the place if you're hunting Idaho, Montana, that sort of stuff. But if you go up higher, you're going to run into that primo green up that bears are much easier to hunt in. Now, of course, it's probably coming to your mind like, well, what if there's no bears hibernating up there? It's my opinion, particularly when you're mountain hunting spring bears, that a lot of bears that have woken up earlier, they actually tend to migrate up to the newer green up. I've seen this not necessarily just in the mountains, but it's pretty stark in the mountains because you'll be up sometimes like right at, almost timberline, right? You're catching the last little bit of the melt off, and all of a sudden there's a whole lot of bears there that couldn't have been hibernating that high, right? And I've seen this, in northern British Columbia, or I should say more like central British Columbia, where you have mild terrain, but you're covering like huge amount of latitude, right? Because you've got logging roads where you can haul ass. You're able to cover a lot of latitude, and kind of the same thing. A lot of those bears are clearly migrating as a preference choice to the newer green ups. You've got to focus on that. That's my primary first point. If you want to be effective, yes, there's bears other places, but if you want to be effective by locating the highest density of bears in the spring, focus on that. Don't dwell on what it's been like in the past or what people have told you for those specific dates. It doesn't matter. You have to have the mindset that this is not a photo period based variable, purely environmental, so it's up to you as a hunter to find where the bears are at. One thing I'll say here is, like, if you get too late to the party, right, and all the way up to the top of the mountain, everything's melted off, this isn't an option. If you're not baiting, you're focused on spot and stock, your hunting's gonna be tough. So one takeaway right here is don't hunt too late, or your hunting's gonna be tough regardless. Doesn't mean you can't kill bears, but your hunting will be tough. So on this environmental variable deal, timing your hunts, where you should be elevation-wise, all the pre-work you can do on that, all the scouting, even right now we're a couple weeks out deciding what week you're gonna go, that is a giant subject matter on its own. And I've got several hours of content on it in my Spring Bear course. It's available at pursuitwithcliff.com/spring bear. I get into the nitty-gritty. I use a bunch of resources out there to basically triangulate what it's going to look like in the field. I look at stream flows, I look at snow melt, I look at historical and recent imagery. I dive crazy deep into that. Like I said, it's an entire subject matter on its own right, but there's a lot there, so if you're interested in that, go check out the course. Now, on actual tactics in the field, you guys get the gist of what we're trying to do now, right? We've got a goal, so the question is, how do we do it, and how do we do it in an agnostic way relative to how we're hunting, right? So it doesn't matter if you're backpack hunting, it doesn't matter if you're road-based hunting, and this is a big factor that you have to understand with spring bears, because a lot of guys, they always want to take what they've figured out on other species like elk and deer, and a lot of times in the same regions, and then apply it to spring bear. The problem is a giant factor in killing elk and deer in these wilderness areas that all of you guys have access to, is a huge part of tactics and strategy, and that is hunting pressure. With spring bears, it's not. The only way that hunting pressure plays in is literally in the moment. If you're trying to stalk a bear and another hunting party is trying to stalk that same bear, obviously problematic. The other place where it comes into play is just the overall biology of the area. If the area has been getting the shit hunted out of it, then obviously the bears are going to be younger, the bears are generally going to be smaller, right? So pressure plays in that way, but overall tactics and bear behavior, it's almost irrelevant. So it really doesn't matter if you're backpack hunting or road-based hunting in terms of success. There's not this inherent increase in success just because you go remote. And if you don't follow along with what I'm about to get into, it can actually hurt you by being remote and limiting your options. Because of this, a lot of you are probably screaming at the screen going, well, then why would anybody do a backpack hunt? The primary reason to do a backpack hunt for spring bear hunting is for the experience. It's much different. It's that backcountry wilderness experience. And then also the transferable skills. So if you're looking to increase your capabilities as an elk or deer hunter in these same areas or similar areas, you're going to get more out of a backpack hunt in general, because building that skill set will generally increase your success rate on those species. So it's a good thing. That's why a lot of the hunts that I do, a lot of the group hunts that I do, are spring black bear hunts that have a backpacking component. Now, we need to dive into the tactics that you're going to use under either scenario, right? So let's start with the road-based hunt. All right, so the road-based deal, and I have a video, it's 4 or 5 years old. I'll stick it up right here. You can check it out. It really talks about this, right? Road-based spring bear tactics. First thing you got to do if you're going to be road-based is you've got to choose the right area. The easiest way to do this is to look at areas that have logging infrastructure. So we're talking about logging roads that aren't just in valley bottoms. They go hopefully all the way up close to timberline, right? So you've got all that elevation to look at, all that elevation grade to maneuver through. Those are the areas a road-based hunter wants to focus on. You don't want to be caught as a road-based hunter stuck in an area where you're only in the valley bottoms and you can only glass up. That's going to limit you as a bear hunter, because what we're trying to do here, we're trying to first figure out that elevation or that latitude where the bears are at. Obviously, in the States, our regions aren't giant. Our tags may not cover gigantic areas, so we got to focus a little bit more on elevation. So you've got to have that component of the area that you narrow down. When you're actually hunting out of your vehicle, cover ground. Do not feel bad about going fast. I have killed dozens and dozens of black bears with hunters in British Columbia in big swaths of logging country where we drove on the roads 40, 50 miles an hour, hundreds of miles a day to narrow down where those bears were at in terms of elevation. And the key way to do that is not necessarily stopping every 200 yards to glass. The key way to do it is to look for bear shit on the roads and then also look for feeding on the roads. I get real deep into this in the course, but a couple primary tips, and these are like the 80-20 of the tips, right? Look for bear crap on the shoulder. Bears are lazy. They will use logging roads, 2 tracks, anything that's easy for them to maneuver on. They will use that to move through country as they move to feeding areas in the spring. So a lot of times you'll find bear shit in the middle of the road, on the edge of the road, just off the shoulder of the road. Look for those piles. A lot of times the vegetation is just starting to come up, so they'll actually be above the vegetation. Pretty obvious to see. If you're on 2 tracks, right? So you're on a 2-track, here's the tire tracks, and then there's a middle strip of vegetation. Watch for any feeding on that middle strip. If you key in on that as you're driving in your side-by-side, you're driving on your 4-wheeler, you're driving in your truck, look for bear feeding areas. It's really obvious, particularly once they start hitting certain types of vegetation. So for instance, they'll hit dandelions. So if you're driving down a 2-track, you could be going pretty fast and you're seeing dandelions, right? You're seeing dandelions, and then all of a sudden you see a 30-yard stretch with no dandelions. Get out and look at those plants. Have they been nipped off? Bears eat in a very unique way in the spring where they curl their lips back, stick their teeth down, and they nip. And you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. Typically, they'll hit the dandelions, they'll hit the clovers, and you'll see where they just chewed off that grass. On shoulders of logging roads where it's just grass, a lot of times you'll see them do the same thing, and it's almost like a weed whacking pattern, right? Because they're just moving back and forth as they feed. So those are the 2 things that you're going to be looking at when you're road-based hunting. And that's basically the tactic. That is the golden goose of road-based spring bear hunting. Cover a ton of ground, make sure you have the right area with the right infrastructure, look for bear shit, and look for those feeding patterns and that feeding sign, and then you're gonna know you're in an area where the bears are at, and then you can go into glassing, you can go into just sitting on high potential spots, all of that good stuff. But first, you've got to focus on the tactics of actually finding where they're at. Guys, biltong, okay? I have been obsessed with this stuff for 3 or 4 years. Ever since I got on a keto, carnivore, paleo-esque type of diet, I've had a hard time finding healthy snacks. Biltong is a great option, particularly the slabs that have this fat on the side. That's where your energy is if you're a fat burner like me. Super simple ingredients in this, guys. Literally 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ingredients. Compare that to your gas station jerky, a great snack in the backcountry or just day to day. Biltong Depot is a huge supporter of my content. Go to their website, biltongdepot.com. Use my discount code CLIFFG, CLIFFG for 15% off at checkout and to support this content. Thanks, guys. All right, so on backpack hunts, we're much more limited on our logistics and we can't cover as much ground, right? We're not gonna just hike around miles and miles, literally hundreds of miles would be the equivalent to the road-based hunt. It's impossible to do that, right? So we can't focus on just trying to cover a volume of ground and then sign coming to us. Instead, we have to depend on glassing. So what that means on the backpack hunting scenario is you've got to be in the right spots in the prime times to glass up bears. And when you're first trying to identify at what elevation they're at, you've got to do that in big country. So again, this comes back to choosing your unit correctly. Don't go on a spring bear backpack hunt where you can't glass big swaths of country. If you're going somewhere where you're really limited and there's just little bitty holes and everything's thick, there could be a shit pile of bears there, but it's gonna be nearly impossible for you to kill bears there. That same type of country, that thick country, all of that, it's actually pretty good country in the first scenario, right? Because a lot of times it's heavily logged, because obviously there's trees. There you can use those road-based tactics to find sign and then find the bears and you're already narrowing it down. But in these backpack hunts, you've got to depend on glassing because you don't have the logistics to do the former. So you can't go into areas that are unglassable. That's the first tip. Now, the next tip is you've got to be there prime time. So that means that you've got to glass 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, basically to dark. So you got to be walking home in the dark, never be back at camp by dark, that sort of thing, right? You've got to glass all the way to that very end. And I'll dive into this here in a second when I give you a couple, glassing specific tactics. You have to do some pre-work on this, some e-scouting, to figure out the exact glassing points you're gonna be at. Or you've just gotta know them from historical knowledge of the area or somebody telling you them. So I'm gonna dive in here onto Onyx and show you how I nail down the type of glassing points I'm talking about. Glassing points that are all about just finding the bears from the get-go. That's what you gotta key on these backpack hunts, or again, you're just walking around with your thumb up your ass. All right, guys, mini spring bear e-scouting course. All we're gonna focus on is finding the exact glassing points you wanna be at, where you can maximize your chances of finding those bears and then therefore knowing what they're eating and then knowing at what elevation they are, right? Because that's gonna guide the rest of your hunt. You wanna do this as quickly as possible. So I'll show you a couple tools here in Onyx that are going to make this drastically easier. So the first way you can do it is you can just look at the hybrid. I like the hybrid screen here. So I've got my topo plus I have the satellite on here. And that's going to tell you where the green grass is, right? Everything that doesn't have timber on it is going to have exposure, and that's going to have the green grass, right? So pretty simple to figure that out. I'll show you another method here that's a little more specific, but that's going to give you a very good general sense. Now, when you start looking at this type of topography, it really matters that you're within like the sub-region you're working. Like let's say we're on this ridge right here, right? We want to be at the actual highest point given how much effort we want to put into this, right? So what I like to do is I like to use this 3D exaggeration, right? And this is actually going to be more useful the less rugged the terrain we're looking at. So right now we're looking at pretty rugged terrain, so you can still see what it does. It makes it very apparent, like, okay, now that I've exaggerated the terrain, this point right here is actually going to be probably substantially better than this point. Zoom out here, particularly if I'm trying to get some exposure to these south-facing slopes right here, right? that little difference is going to make a big difference. And then that 3D exaggeration shows me that even this point here is even better, right? Whereas if I don't have that exaggeration, it's a lot harder for me to look at this ridge and see really where is the best point. Like, is this point better or is this point higher, right? It's pretty hard to tell. So I use that 3D exaggeration a lot. So a couple tools that are gonna help us do this even better is go over here to Elite Tools, go to Terrain X, pull it up. We're looking at the same chunk of topography. Now we can be a little more specific on what is actually gonna have the green up, what's actually gonna have the vegetation on it that the bears like. It's gonna be the south facing stuff, right? So we can go over here, we can use this slope aspect tool, take off anything north facing, just look at this south facing country. This is gonna be the stuff that greens up first and stays the greenest. And you're gonna see here when you look at the map, everything that is light, these slopes, that is gonna be where your primary green up is, right? So if I'm looking at this area here, I'm thinking to myself, all right, this stuff over here, assuming that's where the snowmelt is, that might be something I want to look at, but it's going to be pretty darn tough for me to get way back in there and look at it from close range. So where can I maximize a glassing point where I can see that? All right, so now that we're trying to key in on these shoots right here, I'm going to try to figure out the most efficient way to glass those. Obviously, hiking way back in here is going to be a multi-day journey, because I'm working off of this river trail, right? So I've got this ridge here, or I've got this ridge here, and I want to go just as far as I need to see the south-facing exposure. It's the stuff that's light here because I'm using that slope aspect tool to darken out the north-facing stuff. I want to look at that south-facing stuff. How do I effectively do that? The next tool that I'll use is View Shed. Gives me these crosshairs, and now what you're seeing is the light that you're seeing is what I can see from where I have these crosshairs. So if I chose to go up this ridge, you can, I'm just keying in on this, right? When is that gonna lighten up? I gotta hike all the way up here, still no exposure, no exposure, no exposure, no exposure, no exposure until I get like right in here. That country's starting to light up, right? So that's a pretty far hike. Let me try this other ridge. So here I'm coming out of the bottom, staying on the ridge, right there. And I can lock a little bit further, let's say. I can lock those crosshairs in with a right click a couple times, and then I can zoom in here, and I can see exactly what I'm looking at from that point, right? So all of these slopes are light, right? And that's telling me that one, they've got the right aspect, right? Because we still have it locked in where I'm only looking at southern exposure. And then also I know that from this point that I've locked in here, I can glass those chutes. So this is going to be a very effective glassing point for me to glass that stuff. And look, it's not really too bad of a hike at all. That's the kind of stuff that you want to e-scout a ton here, because once you lock down these points, you're going to be way more effective by going to one spot to the next spot and then looking at all those different chutes across elevation grade and figuring out exactly where those bears are at. Once you know where the bears are at, even if you find them in the next unit over, right, you're glassing across into a unit that you can't even hunt, if you still get the idea of what elevation they're at, you can use that for the rest of your hunt, key in on that elevation. That's where the bears are going to be. You're going to be good to go. So that's the quick and dirty on e-scouting for bears. All right, guys, my Spring Bear online course is up on the website at pursuitwithcliff.com/Spring Bear. I've taken all of my knowledge, everything I've learned on over 50 successful spring bear hunts across the states and across Canada. All of that I've shoved into this course. Right now, there's already 6 or 7 hours up, and I'm going to continually improve this course. Once you sign up, you'll have access forever. All of the information and the full course will be complete by the first week of April. There's a ton of knowledge, a ton of tactics, a ton of gear talk that's going to help anybody who's preparing for a spring hunt. Go check it out. All right, so in actual tactics when it comes to glassing bears, I'm talking about the practical application of increasing your potential of actually seeing the bear. You've got to know a few things. And I dive deep into this in the course, and I'm just going to give you 90% of it right here in a minute. The thing with bears is you've got to understand where their weakness is and where their superpower is. They are black and they tend to come out right near dark. So that is their superpower, okay? They are hard to see by color. Now, their weakness is the whole feeding thing. Back to the fact that bears are cookie monsters of the wild. They are constantly moving because they're constantly feeding or constantly looking for the next optimal spot to start feeding. So they'll literally constantly be moving, and they'll constantly be moving brush. That's what you want to focus on. So that is the key to glassing up bears. You've got to be there at the right time. You've got to glass all the way till dark. If you're walking and it's light, particularly during this period of time where you haven't narrowed down where the bears are yet, you're doing it wrong. Sure, if you know a bear's there and you've glassed him and he didn't come out yet and you've got no time to kill him anyways, sure, go back to camp. But when you're trying to find bears off the bat, you should never be stepping 1 foot towards camp until it is pitch black, because that's the prime time to see bears, right in that last hour and a half. You really should probably be glassing them from, say, 2 to 3 in the afternoon all the way till dark, but that last hour and a half is the prime time. But back to the tactic here. You've got to focus on movement. So all you have is chest binoculars. My personal belief is that you should move to image stabilized binoculars, because you have to control that movement. Even if you're going way down in terms of quality of glass and you're not getting, the light, you're not getting the clarity, you're not able to see the colors as well, it really doesn't matter, because that stabilization is going to help you drastically with bears, because you're isolating their movement. I can see a bear with stabilized binoculars, and that could be mechanically stabilized, on a tripod, or it could be, SIG stabilized binoculars that I'm using a ton. Either way, I can see a bear working brush or moving his head across grass on an avalanche chute. I can see that bear from 1,000 yards with 12 power binoculars that are stabilized, all right? You can see them very well. I've got a whole video on stabilized binoculars. You can check it out right here. I'll stick it up right here. Maybe it's here. I get it all screwed up all the time. But go check that out. I'm telling you, it works well, and it's key for this kind of stuff. If you don't want to go to the stabilized route, you for sure have to have your optic on a tripod, or you've really got to learn how to frame. And I'll stick another video up here that talks about how I frame, tactics like that are going to play huge into this, because glassing bears is all about isolating movement. You're going to find bears by seeing their movement primarily. Every once in a while, you'll see a bear running across an avalanche chute as he moves, that sort of thing, but that tends to be the anomaly. Generally, what you're gonna see is you're gonna see them come up out of a canyon, right there the last 2 hours of light. They're gonna come out, and the first thing you're gonna see is on the edge of the vegetation, you're gonna see them starting to move or move brush. So look for those branches moving, look for those shakes, and then when they're out actually in open grass feeding, even when it's almost dark, you can see the movement of the bear. You can just see that shadowy movement, and that's how you're gonna glass up the vast majority of these bears. So key in on that. Don't worry about the other aspects of glassing. That's the primary thing that's gonna result in more bears found. And this whole timing thing, I dwell on it all the time, but I wanna solidify it for you guys. I wanna, I guess, show you how I think about it, because I can talk about it all the time, but when you're in the field, it's still easy to just give up on the concept, right? But the best way to think about it is be willing to give up every other part of the day. So for logistics, if you're tired, if you're hungry, if you're worn out, all of that stuff, give up the first part of the day, say before 3 o'clock. Never give up that last 10 minutes of light when you're spring bear hunting. Never give it up, right? You can give up everything else. The reality with spring bears, if you really look at the probability when they're found, when they're killed, you should never be exhausted, even on a backpack hunt. Because if you want to sleep in the morning, catch up for 2 or 3 hours, bullshit with your buddies at camp, eat well, get rest, jump in a river, get cleaned up, be refreshed, you got tons of time to do that. The days are really long. Spend the first half of the day at the wilderness spa doing that. there's really not a giant downside of that on these type of hunts. So take care of all of that, any of your logistics, right? I've got to get to this spot. I've got to get to that spot. I want to check out this drainage. First half of the day, period. Never do that stuff in the afternoon. If you ever do it in the afternoon, particularly right there late at night, right? Wanting to get home, eat dinner, get some sleep, all of that stuff. If you burn that part of the day, it makes 0 sense on these spring bear hunts. Just brand that into your brain, all right? Give up everything else, take care of yourself, but focus in on that period of time. That's how I think about it, and that's how I do it, right? This isn't about being uber tough or anything like that. It's just about time management, allocating your time and effort in the right spot. Guys, I've been using onX Maps for almost 2 decades now, hunting, guiding, outfitting. It is the gold standard tool when it comes to mapping software in the hunting world. They've been a huge supporter of my content for multiple years. So if you want to support me and you want to support them, use my code CliffG for 20% off at onxmaps.com. It is an awesome tool that I use all the time when I'm preparing for hunts, and I use it almost every single day in the field. For navigation, knowing unit boundaries, knowing private land boundaries, it is the tool you have to have. All right, some quick gear topics for spring bear hunting. And I've got like a 6-page list on the spring bear course. You can go check it out, but here's some low-hanging fruit for you. So one unique thing with spring bears, particularly these hunts that a lot of us have access to, so all the wilderness areas that are on these river systems, big steep canyons, the shooting opportunities a lot of time are kind of binary, right? You're either going to take a shot from 450, 500 yards, or you're going to cross the canyon because you're glassing the bear across the canyon. Maybe you get lucky and you can do it that afternoon, make a quick move, or most likely you're going to get over there the next afternoon, be right where the bear comes out and have a 200-yard shot, 150-yard shot, right? So those are the 2 scenarios we're looking at, and a lot of times there's not much in between. So if you choose to take those further shots, you're capable of doing that, you feel like you can ethically do it, that's completely up to you. Make sure you've actually done it, you've actually practiced those types of shots. But on the gear front, make sure you have some good rests. And I know we can debate, should we use packs, should we use bipods? This stuff is time sensitive in terms of setup. What are you actually going to shoot off of better? But I can tell you with spring bears, most of the time on these further shots, you're watching across the canyon, generally where a bear is, and he's going to come out the last 30 minutes of dark, and he's going to be moving around, but you're going to have a lot of time to set up. We're like, that bear's going to come out here. I've got an hour to set up and practice with my rest. Dry fire the different locations where that bear could come out. So for me personally, I think you should go crazy on rest. Have a rear rest, right? And that could be an actual lightweight bag that you bring in. It could be an ultra lightweight dry bag that you can stuff some shit in and make your own, rear rest. It could be the Wiser Precision, stick setup. You can use that as a rear rest. A good bipod in the front. Practice on your pack and use your pack. All of that is essential. I'll stick some links down below on what I use, but that is a gear factor that if you're going to take those long shots, you've got to focus on these spring bear hunts. Another one that's pretty unique to spring bears is if you're in a remote area, or if you just want to save a bunch of money and turn your own paws, get the skull out, salt the hide, and send it directly into a ruggery. If you're in the field for a long period of time, you might need to salt the hide regardless, just because of the remoteness. But for most of you guys in the States, it's all about just being able to get it in a situation where you can ship it directly to a ruggery. You're going to save a bunch of money. I've got a video right here that covers a bunch of those topics. One of the key things that'll help you do this is a bird beak knife. They're like 10 bucks. I'll stick a link down below. I use one all the time. Pretty unique knife that helps you get the pieces of flesh out that cause a lot of slipping on hide. So that last knuckle in the claws, all of that sort of thing, a bird beak knife is going to help you greatly. So get one of those if that's a route you want to go with hides, salting, all of that good stuff. The other knife that I would recommend, and this is a shameless plug, but a specific skinning knife, if again, you want to save some money, salt your own hides, using a skinning specific knife and knowing how to use it, you can check out mine, Cliff Skinner. It's going to allow you to skin a bear and have it very close to salt ready. You're gonna have very little fleshing time, and that's gigantic. If you try to skin these bears with a little, all around hunting utility knife, you're gonna end up with more fat on them, more flesh on them, more stuff that takes a bunch of post care. I'll also stick a link below to a more economical one. You can use Victorinox's lamb skinner, you can use their beef skinner, and you can accomplish a very similar result. So check those out. The last piece of gear that I'll talk about specifically for spring bear hunting, I've already alluded to it, that's getting your binoculars under control and controlling that movement. So check out the stabilized binoculars, or check out good tripods, good pan heads that are going to allow you to stabilize your optic. I'll put a bunch of links down below on what I use. Now guys, if you got some value out of this, you'll get a huge amount of value out of this stalking video. It's about how I stalk elk. You can apply the acronym in there exactly to bear stalks. So once you've found bears, you're going to stalk that bear. You've got to close the distance. Use this setup, and I guarantee your success is going to go through the roof. Thanks guys. I'll catch you later.